son? Where'd you find this?
Buckle up, buttercups. It's time to get down to business. Oh, yeah. It's the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Totally legit.
All right, folks, welcome back. It is once again the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Please be sure to like and subscribe if you're liking the content. That really goes a long way, and we really appreciate it. Today, I am incredibly excited for a guest that I've wanted to have on this show ever since I discovered their page. The only researcher, in my opinion, on YouTube who's creating documentaries that are up to snuff with anything that would be nominated for awards. Please welcome the host of the show, Eyes Wide Open.
Thanks for having me on, James. And really appreciate the work you're doing here as well on the TLB podcast. I really admire the wide range of guests you have on and different topics you're willing to tackle. So appreciate the work you're doing. Thanks for having me on.
Well, that really means a lot. You know, there are few creators that I've come across that I was completely consumed by your channel. I can't remember which video was the first video of yours that I saw, but I remember by the end of it thinking, like, this isn't a YouTube video. This is this is better than most documentaries I'm watching on streaming services or that I've hunted down on the internet. And the quality of the work that you do, not only in how you present it visually in the video form, but the research and separating your opinion from actual facts. Your stuff is better researched than most of the things that I have seen climbing down the CIA rabbit hole for the past 30 years of my life. So I'm kind of interested if you could just kind of introduce yourself and what makes you, because you have to be kind of crazy to start a YouTube, right? Like, you could just be a guy and know all this stuff, or write a book, or do something that isn't involved with social media. But to do it on social media, you have to be kind of a sadist. So I'm interested in like how you took your hobby and passion for researching these topics and was like, you know what? I need to codify this. I need to put this out in an organized way so that people who don't have my attention span can ingest it and it can inspire them to learn more.
Yeah, I mean, it really came down to, well, I've been wanting to kind of restart on YouTube for a long time. I made a few YouTube videos back in like late high school when I was in like grade 11, grade 12. This was like in the mid 2010s. And I got a pretty good reaction to them at the time. And I got one YouTube check in ad revenue in my grade 12 year. You know, it felt pretty special. Like, I mean, I was like, this is pretty great. And then I went to university. Didn't have time to work on videos anymore, partied a bit too hard, you know, didn't really keep up with it, right? A lot of other priorities there. And from there was just always a nagging to go back to it because I just kept learning new things. And I felt like, well, I actually studied like film production in school. So I was gaining a lot of experience like working in editing and working in like more like script writing, like on the sort of fictional side. But I was getting to become a much better writer than I'd been in high school, obviously. So it was always kind of like a nagging thing. I always wanted to go back and return to YouTube and make videos that were kind of more geared to my interests as they had developed. So finally in 2022, I was done with my studies pretty much, and then I was pretty well established in a decent day job, office job. So I had time in the evenings and weekends to, and I was single at the time as well, so I had a lot of free time. So I was, I just had time to kind of finally sit down and make something and make a documentary. Yeah, and really, for anybody that's looking to get into this kind of thing, the hardest thing is getting started. Just sit down and put something out. You know, that's the number one, right? Because once you get the ball rolling, it becomes much easier to get into a routine and get better and better at it. And that's sort of where I've come from. Like, my first video is pretty rough going back and watching now, the first video, The History of the CIA series. But I feel myself getting better and better with every video I make and the more books I read as well. So I had a pretty solid foundation to start with, but over the past 3 years, like, that has just exponentially grown just from me reading articles, primary documents, books, and I'm fortunate enough to say that for now, this year, starting in January, this is my full-time job. So like I'm doing this.
Nice, dude. Congrats.
Thanks. So it's it's a bit of a stressful time because like I am making that leap, and it is a big risk, but at the same time I feel great about it. I've been, so much more productive, and really that's essentially it. It's just this thing I started when I was a teenager, and then now like coming back to it in adulthood, and seeing it succeed. My goal has always been to produce kind of the best documentaries that I can make, and to take content that otherwise was really only in audio format. I found like a lot of this stuff usually is in like long form podcasts, and turning it into a visual medium as well to help people to follow along and to keep track. Because personally, I'm also a very visual learner. So I always found it difficult with podcasts to retain information, especially in these very complex networks. So I find with the video format, it allows people to maybe retain a bit more information, or to at least put faces to names, You
also do an absolutely incredible job of digging up archive footage. You do a really good that's what I mean to say. Your stuff, in my opinion, is better than most, if not all, of the documentaries I've seen on any of the topics that you've covered, because you'll find video that somebody else could have found and put in a major documentary, but they didn't give it that extra attention to detail. Like, you really go a little bit further in every aspect of your production, and it shows. That's why I got sucked in. Just for fun, I'm going to show you the this is my YouTube. I'm logged in on my YouTube. I've watched every single one of these. The ones that I don't have marked here, I watched on a different account, on my other Gmail account. But every single one, and every single one of these documentaries is a hitter. Every single one of these things is opening up a door that I did not know exist. It's making me contextualize it in a way that I had not before. And maybe that's kind of to your point. A lot of the information that exists on this timeline, by virtue of it being, as early back as the 40s, is just that there wasn't a lot of video. There were pictures, sure, but even those are kind of hard to track down, and pictures deteriorate over time. A lot of the information I've heard about all of these topics has been somebody talking about it on a podcast with no visual aid, or somebody, or audio only, like you were talking about. So just being able to, some of the images and video that you put into these things is like, it's like, oh my gosh, I finally have context for what that person looks like. Oh my God, there's a picture of him with this other person that's also like deeply connected into this mysterious web. And the link to your YouTube page, again, for people listening, will be in the description. I highly recommend everything. We're going to kind of start picking away at the CIA for a little bit, and then we're going to kind of get into your George Bush videos, which in my opinion are the best explanations of that aspect of the entire web, but we'll get to that later. So at what point as a kid do you start getting into the CIA? Because I feel like there was me as a kid, and I always looked at the FBI and the CIA as these secretive organizations, but inherently for some kind of good. Mm-hmm. But the more I grow and the more I learned, the more I realized that, these guys are operating in gray areas, right? And when you're operating with impunity in gray areas, a lot of really weird stuff can happen. And in many cases, stuff just goes completely unchecked. So at what point for you were you like, specifically about the CIA, I need to know more, I have to dig in? What was the thing that sucked you into that?
Well, I guess like I've been sort of a political skeptic since I was pretty young. I guess it was when I was, still a child, and the earliest memory I have was watching the news with my dad, and it was the Iraq War. And he couldn't explain to me, I must have been 9 or 10 years old, why U.S. troops were being brought back in body bags or in coffins from a war in the Middle East. He couldn't explain why they were there in a convincing way to a 10-year-old, you know? And to me, that's that from that point on, and him being unable to explain it, you know, I just kind of thought, you know, there's got to be more here, or why are we even, you know, being okay with this? You know, these were very simple, you know, child thoughts, but they did evolve into a sort of lifelong skepticism, you could say, with you know, power and with war specifically. You know, I am a very ardent, you know, anti-war person. You know, that's one of my core values in that sense. But yeah, the whole CIA angle came more during college. So I had a roommate in college who was really big into sort of he was a history major, so he kind of passed on a lot of information to me about this stuff, and I took a few courses. I took one on the modern Middle East, which was quite interesting, and we had a pretty good prof who went into a lot of this sort of covert operation stuff, even just tangentially. Like, she talked about the Iran coup in 1953. That got me interested. You look into that, you get to Alan Dulles. That same roommate gave me The Devil's Chessboard to read. He said, you got to read this book. You know, it had just come out, and I was at that point just kind of, you know, just reading different stuff, and this came across my desk, and I read through it in probably like a week. I couldn't put it down. So all of that kind of came together and I was listening to a lot of podcasts about this stuff. So I was really getting into that sort of research topic at that time in my later college years. And really what sparked it for me was realizing or coming to the conclusion that so many recent events tied pretty directly to CIA drug smuggling as a sort of guiding principle, or a central nexus for power and for covert power, we'll say. Like, I had a saying for a while that, you know, everything is deep down CIA drug smuggling. And you know, like if you look at modern history, everything like just boils down to that point.
Kind of accurate.
At a certain, yeah, like you can make the links, you know, pretty clearly, at least for the post-war period. That said, though, like, from there, that really opened a lot of doors into how organized crime operates, and how organized crime has a very wide breadth. We think of organized crime as gambling syndicates and drug smuggling, which those are obviously two huge elements of it.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's the human trafficking element, of course, that we're all becoming very aware of now with these Epstein emails. There's, you know, of course, arms trafficking. There's, and you could even then put like international business in that same circle as well. And these overlaps all happen kind of in the same nexus. So in that sense, that brought me to this conclusion. You know, there is an architecture below the surface. There is a power structure that is running parallel to our understood history, right? Some people call it the deep state, you know, some people call it deep politics, some people call it, you know, whatever else, right? But there's an overworld and there's an underworld. And to me, the most fascinating parts are how that overworld and the underworld interact and how they intersect, right? That gives you the full picture of how modern history works. So that's really like where my interest in all this comes from.
That's super cool. I also think that the gateway into a lot of these areas of research are so similar. Because, I mean, for sure, what made me a skeptic was the same thing, the Iraq War.
Yeah.
As a 12-year-old, I was like, what is going on here? Mm-hmm. So we invaded this place. They didn't attack us. The people that attacked us weren't from here. We said they had weapons of mass destruction, and they don't. This doesn't make sense. Surely the government wouldn't lie, which the answer is, of course they do. That's what their job is. And especially at the CIA, that is their like explicit purpose, is to control perception. So I just always think it's funny that there's certain for people who are the boomers, it was JFK's assassination, also directly tied to this stuff. For our generation, it's the Iraq War, September 11th and the Iraq and Afghanistan War. But I just think it's funny how those moments, either it catapulted you to being like a staunch not Republican, like a staunch America first. I love America. I bleed red, white, and blue. Or it turned you into like the most hilarious version of the skeptic of the government. There's I don't know if you're familiar, Adam McKay, British BBC documentarian.
Oh yeah,
hang on one second. I can't remember the name of the documentary. It came out around 2020. But basically, Adam Curtis. There we go. Adam Curtis.
Yeah, Century of the Self. Yeah.
And the not Century of the Self.
It was Hypernormalization.
Early 2000s. This one was
it Hypernormalization?
It may have been this. It wasn't MK Ultra, or maybe it was Can't Get You Out of My Head.
Oh, okay, yeah.
2021. But regardless, in one of those documentaries, all of which are great, I'd highly recommend checking those out to people who are listening. But he kind of posits this idea that Americans are we're like predispositioned to be conspiracy theorists. Like the origin of our country was a conspiracy. The leaders, the founders, like conspired in secret to get the British out. So it's like weirdly baked into the American psyche to be skeptical of the power, to be skeptical of the people in power. But I just find it really funny that my favorite documenters of that juxtaposition are all Canadian. And we were talking about it with you, and there's another podcast that I do a lot of stuff with called The Swerve. Like they're more skeptical about this stuff than even Americans are. And I'm just wondering, from like the perspective of somebody in the US, from somebody in Canada, how scary is it to have us as the downstairs neighbor? Like, does it concern you that we're so loose and goosey with nuke stuff and threatening stuff? Like, what is it as a Canadian where you look, because I'm sure there's correlations to similar behavior in Canada, maybe even, like hand-in-hand coordination, but like as a Canadian, what makes you look at this and be like, this is fucked?
Well, like, fundamentally, like, Canada is a part of the imperial core here with the United States. So sure, I get a lot of for being a Canadian talking about American history. Oh, you can't talk about that. You don't know it. You can't understand it. You're just a Canadian or whatever. But it's like, look, like anything that happens in the United States affects us almost equally. Sure, our economies are so interconnected. We share the largest land border in the world. It's inevitable that any development in the United States will affect Canada, and to a certain degree, maybe at a lesser degree, anything that happens in Canada affects the United States, right? But of course, the United States has 10 times the population. You guys are the global hegemon, quote unquote, or one of them at this point. Anything that happens in Canada is more of a ripple compared to anything that happens to the United States is an absolute tsunami for Canada, right? So in that sense, I've always believed this, that as a Canadian, I need to understand the US system almost better than the Canadian system, because that has almost a stronger effect on our system than anything that could happen domestically. And, this brings up some difficult questions about Canada's vassal status to the United States. We have sort of sleptwalked into a sort of, I don't even know how to put it, but like a vassal status, a quasi-vassal status, where we are independent in terms of being a nation state, but our economies are so interlinked that we are at the fundamental level dependent on the United States. So in that sense, I need to have a strong understanding as a Canadian or as a North American in general of, the largest economy in the world that is our largest trading partner and our largest land border, or our only land border. But beyond that, I'm not worried about any of these kind of like invasion threats. I think that's a bit overblown. What does worry me, though, is the province of Alberta becoming Canada's Donbass, and potential intelligence ops or meddling in terms of, I guess, stoking separatism in southern Alberta. I don't know if you've been following this at all. That there was recently a referendum in Alberta for separation, or maybe it hasn't happened yet.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah. And some of those leaders have met with the Trump White House recently and have come back and talked about their meeting with the presidency, or with the presidential administration. So this could be a real issue in terms of U.S.-Canada relations in the upcoming years if, let's say, the CIA or any other intelligence agency of the United States continues to kind of stoke the fires of separatism in southern Alberta. And I mean, that's our most conservative province. There's obviously issues there in terms of the oil. Right now, there's big concerns with the government of the neighboring province, British Columbia, having a lot of issues or debates internally about building a pipeline to get our oil to the Pacific. Because as it was before, we sold most of our oil to you guys because that's where all the refineries were. So part of this new vision is refocusing to try to sell our oil through the Pacific to the Asian countries. But there is a sort of internal provincial issue there where the province of British Columbia seems to be refusing to build the pipeline. So Albertans look south to the United States and to the Trump administration that says, hey, we will build your pipeline. We'll get your oil to market, not only in the United States, but to the Pacific. And that seems pretty enticing to a lot of oil workers that are out of jobs, and understandably. I mean, it's
Sure,
these are working people and whatnot. But at the same time, it does bring up some very troubling developments in terms of the national unity, I guess we'll say.
Well, this is another reason why I see what you do as super valuable, because there's the saying, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Right. Yes. And there's so many instances just from the videos that you've made where if you do know this history, when you look at any type of situation like this, it's hard to think that the CIA or some intelligence agency is not somehow involved with it.
Of course.
Just the amount of money, the specific power players that are a part of it. And I mean, definitely right now in the age where truth is dead, truth a couple years ago, and we're just living in this reality where everything can be fake or AI or whatever.
Right.
That just makes what they're trying to do so much easier. We as people are very easily fooled. But again, that's why I like your stuff, because I want to explain something to people who haven't seen any of your videos, and it's that when a lot of these topics are talked about, it's looked at as a conspiracy, right? An unfounded conspiracy, people just saying things, correlation becomes causation. But your videos are not that. Your videos are kind of the opposite. It's less conspiratorial and more just looking purely at the actual facts and connections. It's just through analyzing that, it becomes impossible to look at it as anything other than some kind of, like you were talking before, there's the overworld and the underworld.
Yes. And
we might be occupying space in the overworld thinking that the overworld is what makes the world turn. In reality, it's the underworld. So I am kind of interested in your thoughts in terms of like, where do you see those connections? Like, where do you see the most similarities as you're covering these topics? What modern things overlay over top in your mind? Like, as you're going over this stuff, you're like, man, this is just like this other thing that's currently playing out right now. But again, a lot of what you're talking about now is just codified history. It can be verified by multiple reports, and you do an excellent job of not overlaying your speculation over the whole video. And you even clearly identify when it's your perspective speaking versus something that you've read or researched. So I'm just kind of interested in what you think there. Like, as you have learned more about this, what greater understanding of the modern version of this that we're living in has it given you?
Yeah. I mean, I guess to start, it's all kind of a continuum. I mean, if you go from JFK to Watergate to Iran-Contra to 9/11 to then finally, I guess, Epstein, right? It's all one network that is kind of evolving throughout time. People come in, they bring new people in, right? But it's a continuous kind of global, I don't even know what to call it, global organized crime, intelligence, big business blob, right? That has continued to persist. And on a sort of on a meta level, the operation of international capitalism is itself a multiplication of if you want to call it this, conspiracies, but not in the sense that we think, right? But people getting together from different places and coming together and making secret deals. This is normal business operations, right? So to see that and to understand that this term conspiracy theory has been kind of weaponized, because in reality, conspiracies are happening all the time. You start to understand that there is a pattern to these networks and how they operate. And with that said, I mean, I think I'm going to turn to the most recent example of kind of these Epstein emails to kind of make my point here, is that it's hard to come out of reading too many of these emails and not think that, you know, the entire system of big business is at its core just this kind of, that they have no regard for their kind of public service or public duty to the people. They don't think about us at all. It's an entirely separate world. So once you kind of break out of that frame of people being good people and bad people, but just all actors in this world being kind of, first of all, acting with impunity, and second, seeing corruption as everyday business, then you start to realize that nothing really ever changes and that this has always been how it's been.
Yeah.
And with that continuum I was talking about with the same figures, we can talk about Bush, for example, you know, in that context, that Bush, you know, appears around the time of when the JFK networks or JFK assassination networks are forming, and then makes it all the way to 9/11. You can really see that continuum through his career specifically, but through the career of dozens of men around him that were doing the same, you know? Yeah. So once you start to understand that there are two sides of history, like I was saying, the overworld and the underworld, and that understanding the underworld is essential to understanding the overworld, right? Like in high school, we're taught the story of Pearl Harbor. But when you understand all of the kind of subterfuge, I'm using this as an example, all the subterfuge kind of influences on FDR during that time and on the Japanese leadership during that time, all the things that that kind of get glazed over as what you would call a conspiracy theory in high school, then you get the full picture of what Pearl Harbor was, and you get that same image with any other event in history. There's the traditional history that is factual, but it needs to be supported by those additional subterfuge elements that are you can't ignore them. You know, once you know them, right. that they are an element, and that's where this sort of conspiracy theory smear gets so annoying. Is that these are real facts that, you know, people are not just, you know, moral beings. People are fundamentally, there are many people that are corrupt, you know, and that are corruptible and that don't view this, and most importantly, don't view this behavior as problematic. So surely this is happening throughout the system. And once you start to realize that, it becomes a pattern.
Yeah, honestly, looking at all of this stuff, because I was the same, like I was pretty aware of it in high school. I had done some research into like the big ones, but didn't really dig in until I got to college. And then there was like a couple years where I was like, man, what is the point of living? Like this whole entire system is completely washed out. I am just an insignificant cog. What is the point? But after I got over that, at some point, it used to cause me stress. And then at one point, I realized now the world makes sense to me a little bit more. Like, why do we have all this money and resources, but we still can't fix the problems? And then the answer is because the people that have the resources and the money, they don't give a shit about fixing the problems.
Exactly.
And it was like, then now it feels like I understand why this world seems so backwards. And it's because it is kind of backwards. It's just this anti-human, pro-individual idea that the corporate state, the corporate elite have kind of enforced on this country and now the rest of the world. And I 100% agree with you. And I think this is the thing that bothers me the most, is that when you look at the overlap between the people that had the ability to make the policy changes and compare them to the people that had the incentive to change that policy, they're the same people.
Yes.
And then if that isn't a conflict of interest enough, usually through 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, they can be webbed together to if anybody else was interacting with these people, we would end up in prison. If anybody else was doing what these people are doing, we'd be in prison.
Yep.
And these people can do it with impunity because they're making the rules. So it's just so weird, like so many people can look at why there's people that will still question, why did JFK get, and then all you do is zoom out and you're like, oh, well, he was bad for business.
Yeah.
What his ideas were going to hurt billions of dollars. And the people that had that money were like, we can't let that happen. People have been for way less than $1 billion, just so that everyone knows. When
exactly.
you're talking, billions of dollars, industries at stake, people will justify anything, including countries, will justify anything to keep that line going up,
And on that JFK point, right? I've never really obsessed too much about which plot was actually the one that took him out. Because I view it more as the system working as it intended. That there were so many forces that benefited from Kennedy being killed, that the system corrected itself. It came into being to take him out to ensure continuity of whatever the plans were, be it, if you want to look at it from the Vietnam War aspect, if you want to look at it from the Texas oil aspect with LBJ, if you want to look at it from the Israeli angle, if you want to look at it from the, multitude of other angles that I've laid out in my series, so many people had a kind of a motive to see, so many powerful elements, should I say, had a motive to see Epstein, to see JFK, you can see where my mind's been, to see JFK taken out, that the system almost corrected itself. And one of those plots worked, which benefited everybody in a sense. That we're all in the same. That are all in the same network, as you said. And I also wanted to mention one more thing about you made a quick comment about sort of being black-pilled about all this, right? When you start to research it and feeling like we're insignificant, that how could we ever confront such a highly organized network? And what I will say, and I've said this since I started this sort of journey in making these videos, is that one of the big ways that we can regain our autonomy is by researching these networks and laying them out. These people do not like us digging into their stuff, and they do not like us mapping it out, talking about it, and linking it all together. That is a way that we can regain our autonomy, is by actually digging into the material, making these connections, and understanding how the world truly works. I believe that anyways. And that's a way that I feel like I'm regaining my autonomy in this kind of this techno-feudalist world, or whatever you want to call it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. At some point I had to say this can drag me down. But once I got to the realization that this was the real way the world was working, it became like, my opinions of it doesn't keep me up at night. I don't lose sleep. It doesn't make me treat my family or my friends worse or myself worse. It actually gave me a little bit of validation in the sense that, something doesn't feel right. Yeah. And when I look into this stuff, something ain't right. Yeah. I don't know exactly why it is this way, but this explains my dissonance with what is going on. And kind of to your point about the JFK thing, I think that is the thing that gets glazed over a lot. I've had James DiEugenio on the show, who's a really big time JFK investigator, researcher. I've had Lisa Pease, who's a Robert F. Kennedy assassination researcher, and all of the 60s assassinations. But, they're like hyper focused on the areas of their interest. And this is the way, like this, how do you retain any sense of what you were calling autonomy in today's world is rapidly being depleted every day, stripped from us from every angle, and it's looking into this stuff. What I like about your approach to the JFK stuff is not to say, whereas any other JFK researcher might at some point ultimately say it was this person. Yeah. I'm going to dig my heels in. Here's what I've done to prove that it's this person. I don't want to hear anything else. What I love about how you approach the JFK stuff is that I'm going to look at this from all the different parties, related or unrelated, that wanted this guy gone and were logistically putting together options to remove him, it becomes impossible to look at that and say he was by Lee Harvey Oswald. And, you know, even people at the time knew that something was wrong with that, you know, that at least 50% of baby boomers like had that thought at some point in their life. But I really like the way that you approach that and have presented that. All the documentation, same thing with the CIA. Like one of the things that I think is really hard for me to do about a lot of this stuff is it pisses me off. Like as I'm reading, I get pissed off and I'm this motherfucker, I can't believe that we're XXX problem are because of this guy and his ego, his whatever his reasoning was to do that. I get and can get a little more emotional about it, but I love the way you approach it. And I'm not saying you've divorced yourself from the emotions that you may have, but you don't let that bleed into your presentation of the information, which I think is really important. And it's why I love these videos that you've put together, because they're a cold and calculated look at a cold and calculated system. It's the only way you can look at it. You have to remove this idea of what I think the world is or should be, and I have to look at these other people's opinions of what the world is or should be. And just so happens that those people they have enough power and resource to actually make the world what they want it to be. So I don't know. I love how you can present it in a way that is not meant to incite emotional reaction. 'Cause you have to, if you want to understand this stuff for what it is, you have to kind of remove the emotional element. And I'm interested. Is that a thing for you? Like, is there emotional responses that you have to these things that make you go harder after certain subjects? Or do you have to check that? Do you feel that at all? Does the emotion around the weight of what you're talking about ever factor into what you're doing?
Yeah. I mean, I was researching Laos quite closely about 2 years ago now. I've put that series on hold, but that affected me pretty deeply. Just reading about the senseless bombing campaigns in Laos. I mean, Laos is this tiny country in Southeast Asia, and it's also the most bombed country by square mile in human history. So it's, you know, and why, you know, you ask this question, or I ask this question, why, you know, it's this country of you know, less than 4 million people, I believe, at the time, you know, of mostly, you know, rural farmers that was just bombed into oblivion because they were trying to destroy the kind of the North Vietnamese supply lines, right? And that really affected me. The JFK stuff, I think I've become a little bit desensitized to it all.
Sure,
I mean, I think I understand how these guys work quite well. I understand, I think, how these networks operate at this point. That said, the sort of detachment from it, I think, is important on another level. I think that, and maybe other JFK researchers will get kind of annoyed for me putting it this way, but I am gonna share my opinion here in this sense that I think that JFK research often gets relegated to kind of like not serious research or not serious history, because I think there's this belief that people work from an end goal and work their way forward. So, for example, people will have their culprit in mind, and then they'll try to prove their theory from that end point. So starting it backwards. Whereas I'm trying to kind of bring a seriousness to this topic from a fun, like a level that JFK assassination research and assassination research in general from the 60s, be it Martin Luther King Jr., be it Bobby Kennedy, be it et cetera, should be seen as a legitimate form of historical research, and that there is a way to bring a disimpassioned historical lens to these events, because these are events that really happened, right? The whole network I'm drawing out in my Road to Dallas series, that stuff really did happen. And it's important history, not only to JFK, but also to Cold War intelligence history in general and Cold War history in general. So bringing a rigor and a sort of a lack of passion, or not passion in the sense that like I am passionate about these topics, but a lack of sort of emotional charge to it, I think brings a sober look to these topics that maybe otherwise get overlooked by so-called legitimate historians or so-called, establishment historians as being nothing but conspiracy fodder, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to bring this rigor to this that hopefully can make people reassess the JFK nexus as being a rich source of true history.
Well, and there's I have spent so many hours down the JFK rabbit hole, and I still don't have a definitive answer of who I think did it. I'm kind of the mind that you are. There were too many people that were all trying to get this guy out of there. It's impossible to pin it on one person. There's just so many networks of people that were conspiring, not necessarily in tandem, but at the same time, to get this guy out of there. And I also think it's important to, and this is why the divorcing the emotion from it is important to me, because JFK was also a human and also had flaws. The Kennedy family.
Yes.
They're humans. They have flaws, right? When we put people, we create this idea of them being this perfect human who wouldn't treat me like that, and it's just completely wrong. It's not an accurate representation of what that person was. So any of the deep dives that you do into the people around this subject, I just love that it is a cold and clinical analysis of the information that exists about them. It's not even the stuff about Dulles, who many people, as soon as you start talking about Dulles, they'll spaz. Like, that guy is he's the Antichrist. And people say the same thing about the Bush family. They've said that for a long time. And the more you zoom out, the more it just become no, this is what this class of people behaves like. The way that these people behave is they're okay with it. They've been okay with it for forever. And we can't overlay good morals over anyone here, because in order to operate at this level, dirty stuff has to happen. I say this all the time to my friends here. Most of the people in America really take their rights for granted. They're not even aware of the rights. They don't know what a privilege and a right, the difference between those two things is, and they don't understand how unique that situation is here. But they don't want to hear the idea that maybe the person in charge is a lying piece of shit. Right? And I don't know. I guess it's because these are American people, right? So they had to come from American homes and American schools and American neighborhoods. So if they're pieces of shit, if we've elected pieces of shit, it's more representative on what we are as people than it is on them or their behavior. But looking at any of these characters and assigning this, they're the mark of the beast, they're Satan, they're the Antichrist, they're the worst person that ever lived. I don't know. It immediately makes me tune out. It immediately makes me understand that whatever I hear about this person from whoever's explaining it is going to be heavily skewed. And I just really love how that is not how you present this information. So much of this information needs justice done to it. And there's every video that you've made, I've learned about a new person. I've learned about multiple new connections, and I've been looking into this stuff. This is stuff that I have been reading about since I was a kid. Yeah. One of the first heavy conversations I ever had with my dad was because I saw he had a JFK assassination analysis book on his. Oh, yeah. And I was like, what's this about? This is when I was really little, and he was like, well, here's the. And my dad's not a conspiracy person at all. He's very straight laced. Very, we're going to believe the official sources because we have no choice. We have to believe them. But even he was skeptical about that as a kid and growing up. And, I don't know. We overlaid this idea of these people being like these evil, sinister people, or the things that they do, or to be evil specifically for the purposes of being evil. But the more you look at the larger perspective, it really just kind of comes down to money, commerce, right? Like what is the motivation behind any of the stuff that you've talked about? It's not to usher in the Antichrist. It's about corporations trying to make more money, private individuals trying to make more money,
creating a favorable global environment for capital, right?
Absolutely. That is not a conspiracy. We can see that in action every day. That's just the nature of the system that we live in, good or bad. So I'm I guess my next question there would be like, any one of the topics that you've done a video on legitimately earns its own video status. And many of them have broken out into like series, just because there's so much information. There's so many people in here from the area of 40s to 60s. Who is your favorite character? Like all the people that you've looked into, all the weird connection, and there can be multiple, there can be like favorites for different reasons, but like of all the people you've covered in here, of all the people you've uncovered in this research, who are your favorite characters and why?
Man, I mean, I have some, like, I've got a few names that, like, if
totally
they show
fine.
up,
List
like,
them
if they
up.
show up, like, if they show up in, like, my research, I'll like make a note and I'll be like, okay, I need to add this in. Cause, like, I feel like for my viewers as well, I think people have started to pick up, I don't know if you have on certain figures that I'm, like, specifically fascinated with and that, like, I want to continue to, like, track as I get more information. Like, one being, and you actually mentioned this name in your email to me, Edward Lansdale.
Lansdale, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's just an infinitely fascinating figure, just as kind of the godfather of American counterinsurgency. And I mean, it all starts there. I mean, if you want to go into like the history of counterinsurgency in the post-war period, it all blossoms out of Edward Lansdale. I mean, former advertising executive turned OSS agent during the Second World War, based in San Francisco doing propaganda activities. What I imagine he was doing was like, I don't know if you've ever watched like old World War II propaganda videos, like Know Your Enemy, I think was one of the series, or Ready to Fight, I think is another one. So I think he was probably involved in that kind of effort. Not anything too nefarious in that sense, just like pro-war propaganda is kind of the most normal function of a government in wartime, right? So in that sense, but I think it's the lessons he learned while doing that really catapulted him to the top of the counterinsurgency paradigm. Because he goes from San Francisco at the end of the war and is shipped off. And then, well, first of all, he transfers from the OSS to Army Intelligence. So he shifts from Wild Bill Donovan and CIA, kind of future CIA guys, to Charles Willoughby, who is another figure I'm really fascinated with. And he transfers to his command, and he ends up, Edward Lansdale, in the Philippines in the mid-40s, putting down communist rebellions in the Philippines called the Hukbalahap Rebellion. And he works with this guy named General Magsaysay, who becomes the president of the Philippines shortly thereafter. So what he does in the Philippines is he employs sort of innovative counterinsurgency tactics. And this includes what we would call civil affairs nowadays, which is working with the people on one end, but also using the people's sort of superstitions and livelihood and weaponizing that into a proper counterinsurgency strategy. Most famously in the Philippines, he develops this program where he has agents go out into villages where there's a large communist presence, and he spreads rumors that one of the communists in the cells out in the countryside has turned into a vampire and is ravaging the countryside, which essentially then creates this myth that the communists are weaponizing these vampires. Yeah, there you can see, it's been Yeah, this has been written about a lot, and this is a really famous case because it's for at least for people that are interested in this subject, because it's kind of the earliest counterinsurgency use of like occult like folklore to subdue a population. Anyways, Edward Lansdale's time in the Philippines is considered an overwhelming success. And at the time, a lot of the reports are saying that he was able to, quote unquote, pacify the islands with very non-violent means. He barely used any violence, is what they said. I am not so sure about that, because he sets up this this army or this special forces training school in the Philippines while he's there, where a bunch of Filipino mercenaries train that end up working with him in Vietnam later. And these are tough, right? Like these are nasty guys. These are the guys who were doing the wet work in Vietnam. So if we're seeing those guys as veterans of his counterinsurgency program in the Philippines, we can assume that there was probably, I mean, this is mostly just speculation, but I would speculate that he was probably using torture and that sort of stuff in the Philippines. And then that obviously transfers over into Vietnam, where he's shipped after, and he becomes sort of the main U.S. advisor to Ngo Dinh Diem, the first president of South Vietnam, who rules kind of with an iron fist there with his brother Ngo Dinh Nhu, who is the chief of the secret police and this notoriously kind of vicious police apparatus there. So he ends up there in South Vietnam, and he ends up with his deputy, who's this guy named Liu Canet, and he's his deputy in South Vietnam is this Corsican man who worked in south of France during the war with the OSS. He was recruiting Corsican gangsters into the French resistance to fight against the Vichy government in the south of France. And these are the same Corsican gangs that would work with Lucky Luciano on the French Connection as well. So you're getting that CIA drug smuggling right there. But also then now he's in South Vietnam, and he's working with Ngo Dinh Diem's brother in setting up the first opium networks into the hills of Laos, which is obviously where the CIA would end up extremely involved with the secret war there in the 60s and the 70s. So that all starts under Edward Lansdale's watchful eye there, and he's sort of serving as this counterinsurgency guru there. He works in South Vietnam until the late 50s, and then comes back to the United States. And he ends up with this sort of very unfulfilling desk job at the Pentagon as a kind of intelligence rubber stamp agency. He oversees a lot of intelligence ops that are coming through. I think the way it's described in this book I have is that he would oversee, or he was like I guess I don't even know how to describe it, but he would get like the ops on his desk, and then he would either approve or deny them. So he wasn't actually involved in organizing them. He was just there to give that kind of rubber stamp. So he was very unfulfilled there until 1962, when JFK brings him right into the White House to lead Operation Mongoose, which is the sort of I guess you could call it like a regime change operation on the Caribbean to try to overthrow Fidel Castro. JFK and RFK get kind of they get caught up in the whole Lansdale mythos, right? They read these reports about this great guru out in the Pacific who can completely subdue a population without any violence, and is able to do it just through these non-violent means. And they get caught up in this, and they bring him into the White House, and they devise this whole Operation Mongoose, when in reality I feel like Mongoose was probably just a cover for whatever the CIA was actually doing on the ground at the same time, because Mongoose doesn't really go anywhere, and it becomes kind of an abject failure. And by 1963, Lansdale is out of the White House again. But in 64 or 65, I believe, he gets pulled back to Vietnam to start to organize the first counterinsurgency operations during the invasion there and the U.S. occupation of South Vietnam. And then that, of course, translates into Phoenix later, Phoenix being kind of the architecture or the pinnacle of counterinsurgency, that everything then after the Phoenix program in South Vietnam, everything kind of comes from there. And we can see I'll call it the fingerprints of Phoenix within every counterinsurgency program the United States Army and the CIA have put out since. So that's really Edward Lansdale, kind of the godfather of counterinsurgency, U.S. counterinsurgency.
Yeah, his story is so crazy. Just there's like so many. It's just wild to think that person, he had such a profound impact on so many decades after when he was most active even. But no one, like, he's an obscure figure. He's not somebody, he only until recently has his name even been brought up consistently in association with the JFK stuff. He is a very, very interesting figure. And I guess this is going to have to be pure speculation because we can't get inside of his head. But like, what do you think he would think of the state of the world today? Like, debatably, the guy to popularize the idea of a psychological operation, what would he think about the world that we live in today? Would he feel like this was exactly what he hoped? A world where people were so easily influenced and you had a gateway to their mind in their hand or pocket at all times? Or would the infrastructure that exists now, would you think he'd feel guilty for like pushing us in that direction?
You see, it's hard
again,
to say.
Pure speculation, because he never wrote about cell phones. So, we can only think, but.
You see, Edward Lansdale's personal politics are a bit of a mystery because he's often portrayed as this kind of like a liberal amongst a bunch of like hawks. He's seen as this kind of like this non-violent type when he's surrounded by all these total scumbags in the CIA, war pigs, and he's brought in by the Kennedys, which kind of gave him this halo, right, to a lot of people. But in reality, Edward Lansdale was, he shared many of the same politics as his colleagues. He ends up caught up with the American Security Council. I don't know if you've ever heard of this before. Massive lobbying group during the Cold War. They actually get a direct line to the National Security Council in the White House, like directly. They get a direct line, and they actually were furnishing like material to the National Security Council. This is a private organization during the Reagan years. Like they were giving them files. He ends up actually on the board of the American Security Council, and American Security Council were the ones that lobbied for the Vietnam War in those early days. They created this whole paper right on after JFK gets. They released this policy paper that gives kind of like 7 or 8 reasons why the U.S. should invade Vietnam right now. Right? I think it's released on January 1st, 1964. So we're talking, a month and a half after Kennedy's assassinated. He ends up in that group. So in that sense, he seems like he's like the rest, but he was just putting on a face. As for today, and I've actually talked about this on Twitter briefly, I think that Edward Lansdale would be so impressed with the most successful counterinsurgency program of all time being QAnon. And would be blown away by the sophistication and the application of his principles. Because look at QAnon, right? I mean, I've always been extremely skeptical, and I don't know if I can talk about. Can I say that word on here?
You for sure can, and we can roast QAnon because it's I know the flat Earth, in my opinion. But
and I know on YouTube it gets a little dicey with saying that word. But that said, like this is. I think he would see the weaponization of folklore specifically within this paradigm as being extremely effective. If you look at QAnon today versus now with the emails released, it's almost like they were telegraphing that coming, right? And they wanted to code it before the real deluge of information came out. And of course, there's the fingers of Army intelligence all over this, right? I mean, General Flynn, for example, being a major figure. Sure. Yeah, I mean, he was into this same type of counterinsurgency stuff in Afghanistan, right? I mean, famously. And then you look at also Steve Bannon, who has a Navy intelligence background. He's all over this stuff as well. And Steve Bannon, funny enough, I mean, now we're kind of going on Epstein, but let me just really quickly here. Steve Bannon, gets his start in World of Warcraft gold selling in the early 2000s. Not his start, but he was big into that, right? In the early 2000s, okay? Now stay with me here. Stay with me here. He then, I don't have anything to prove this, but I believe it very conceivable that he saw gamers in that moment as being a very, we'll call it fertile ground for radicalism.
Sure.
So he saw this, and he then maybe, speculating here, had an effect on Gamergate, which was kind of the start of the culture war, if you look at it this way, right? The whole thing about women gaming journalists being, bashing games or whatever. They started the whole gender wars. I don't know if you remember this in the early 2010s, like feminists and all that stuff, right? That whole kind of trend.
Man-spreading. I remember man-spreading was a thing of that, yes.
Same, yes. Yeah, this whole culture war thing could have very well spawned with Steve Bannon, who gets involved with QAnon later. And one more thing on that. In 2025 or 2026, even just very recently, streamer, World of Warcraft streamer turned kind of Trump booster, Asmongold. I don't know if you know this guy.
I know that guy, yeah.
He has talked about how he's had personal contacts with Steve Bannon. He started in World of Warcraft streaming around the time when Steve Bannon was doing his gold selling. These guys might have known each other for years. Like, this is that we're seeing here, like what could potentially be the most successful counterinsurgency program of all time.
You know, you said you don't mean to tie it back to Epstein. I didn't want to interrupt you, but it's, I guess, what I hope to do by talking about these topics is to get to a general person the idea that they're not unrelated. These things are deeply intertwined. We can't talk about any of this stuff. When we're talking about the Epstein stuff, it is impossible to ignore all of this because this is the context. This is how we got here. And I don't know, man. Like, I'm so happy that you're out here putting this stuff together. And again, like, this might scare people, but to me, I'll watch your videos. I will overlay the behaviors of the 60s over the behaviors of today. It makes the world make a lot more sense. And I'm honestly like more peaceful because of it. It just, there's just, to some people, they don't even want to entertain the idea that people are willing to do this. But once you get over the hump that not only are people willing to do that, this has always been this way.
Yep.
It just, a lot of things start to make a lot more sense. And like the things that I see people losing their minds over in the news now, to me, they're like, well, of course the government's going to take that position. Of course they're going to do that because you're thinking that these people care about you and that these people are like unimpeachable. They're not the type of people. They don't possess the character to harm other people, and they do. They certainly do. I don't know. Angleton might be my favorite from this era of people. He might be my most favorite, and I've often wondered the same thing. Like, what the would he think? If he could look at the world right now, would he have a big smile on his face or would it concern him? Neither. I don't care about which it would be. Either would be funny to me. That he thought it was funny that the world has ended up like this, or that he was scared that it ended up this way. But it is just wild to think. And I mean, even, kind of bringing it back up to the modern times, like, it's just wild. I had no idea about the Asmongold World of Warcraft Steve Bannon connection. But now that you're saying that, Asmongold's pivot to be a right-wing commentator makes a lot more sense, right? That's why this stuff is important, because it gives you a context and makes the things that don't make sense make a lot of sense.
Also, on that gold selling tangent as well, there's something else that World of Warcraft gold selling in a way could be seen as like a very early iteration of what would become cryptocurrency. And I mean, Bannon was using, Chinese gold farmers to do this, but to run his kind of his gold selling empire. But you could easily then translate that into, these crypto farms that are being built everywhere and the sort of the virtual currency and whatnot, right? It's a perfect analog, and you can see how Bannon might have gotten into this and very well might have introduced Jeffrey Epstein into this, his longtime friend, all the way back from the 1980s when he was working at Goldman Sachs, So it's...
Well, and this has been like a newer development with the latest couple dumps, but like now there's a real serious thread that there's maybe a serious connection between the entity of Satoshi Nakamoto and Epstein, or the camp of Epstein. So again, they don't seem like they make sense, or it doesn't necessarily compute with the average understanding of what people think this world should be. But when you understand that context, it's like, that's not that far off. Before, that was a straight conspiracy. But now that's like 2 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
Yep.
That is almost more legitimate than some of the stuff they pass off as the truth or legitimate to us now. So, you know, I don't know. Again, like I keep saying it, people, if you have not subscribed to Eyes Wide Open, if you have not seen any of these videos, please go watch them. They are the best explorations of these topics that exist on YouTube. On that note, I kind of want to make sure we segue here because this is going to be a whole thing. So up to the 40s and 60s for me, it's Angleton. For you, it's probably Lansdale, right? Ish. After that, for me, it has always been George H.W. Bush.
Yeah, yeah.
That guy, even when I was a kid, I understood. When his son becomes president, I'm like, what? I mean, it's maybe not the first time some nepotism like this happened or something similar to this, but I was like, what? This guy's son? Is he a king now? And you start going down the rabbit hole of George W. Bush. Now, and I was doing this is at like the beginning of the internet, so it was like really forums, and it was also not really well researched stuff.
Right.
There's obviously the Skull and Bones angle, which I've done a million deep dives on Skull and Bones, and I have my own opinions about.
So
what
have I.
that was.
So have I. Yeah. I mean, it's infinitely fascinating, right?
It's weird. It's weird. But then when you kind of zoom out and you look at similar clubs like that that exist primarily at the Ivy Leagues, but even at Yale, there's like 100. Another one of my favorite, and I'm pretty sure you've mentioned it in passing in one of the videos, but it's Scroll and Key.
Yep.
So basically, we'll get into that. Let me finish the thought here. George H.W. has always bothered me, like how his influence and connection to things. It wasn't until I got older that I realized maybe there's this thread that he's connected with the JFK stuff. And that really kind of sent me down the rabbit hole of like, yeah, this guy, he's just another unassuming character that you don't think a lot about. Now, I've watched every single thing, every documentary that has been made exploring HW's connections to the CIA and modern times or the JFK assassination. The only other documentary that I think comes even close, but does a terrible, it almost makes fun of it to the point where you can't take it seriously. There's a series of documentaries called The Dark Legacy. I don't know if you've ever watched those.
I haven't, no.
Independent. I don't recommend it. Yours are better. So
don't recommend
independently. But at the time, for me, it was like, oh, this finally, like somebody is connecting all these weird things that I've read, and now I'm starting to see a more complex image emerge. But The Dark Legacy, independently produced documentary, you can get it on Prime. I want to say there's 1 or maybe 2 sequels, but they really explode the connection by way of Zapata oil to connect JFK to to connect HW to JFK. But when your documentaries came out, I was already watching. Like I was already like consumed with your page. Anytime a new video came out, I was stoked. When those videos came out, I was just so excited because not only in length, cumulative, are they longer than any other doc I saw on it, so there just is more exploration of the topic. It just is better research. It's presented better in a more clear and understandable way. So for anybody specifically looking for a video on your page to watch, I highly recommend those. I am constantly adding that in the comments. People will be talking about George Bush and I'll be like, you need to watch this documentary because it's the best. So could you kind of explain getting to HW and wanting to explain the Bush family connection and then exploring that a little bit? Because there's so many, like from Prescott to W, there's just so much weird shit. They're involved in so many different things. It's almost impossible to think that those people are behaving in any way other than put money in my pocket. But kind of just explain how you get to that point where you're like, okay, I need to do a 3-part series about this guy because it's dense. The lore is dense.
Well, yeah, and like just to kind of let you know, I have like I think I have 4 more Bush videos in me. I think I do. I have like a whole like
Love that.
I have a notes document like on my phone where I just keep like putting like topics for future videos. And as it is now, like I have like 4 more Bush videos, like just to give you a quick like sneak peek, which these might come out like I might try to do them by the end of the year. Number 4 will be involvement with the JFK assassination. Number 5 will be Mexico. Number 6 will be the Phoenix program, involvement with China as the representative to China with Nixon. And then number 7 is Noriega in the School of the Americas in Panama. So there's a lot even left to like. I stopped this series at like 1962. You know, like we're not even into the point where he's vice president yet. You know, like there's
real craziness.
Yeah, there's still so much to mine there. You know, and that's really like the fascinating thing with the Bush family is that it's just a bottomless well of corruption, really. So yeah, I guess starting with Prescott. I mean, Prescott Bush is kind of the patriarch of the family. He's George H.W. Bush's father. He was a big business executive in Ohio, and then becomes a Wall Street banker at Harriman and Co. Bank, Brown Brothers Harriman, Brown Brothers Harriman, which is Averell and Roland Harriman's bank, which is like a super elite Wall Street firm. It still exists to this day, and is extremely secretive. So he joins that. Prescott joins this bank, and on the board of this bank, or in the executive class of this bank, is an entire group of senior statesmen that were going to play major roles in the Truman and Eisenhower administration. Averell Harriman, of course, who plays a pretty significant role. I think he's Commerce Secretary in the Truman administration post-war in those critical 1947-48 years, but also then becomes the governor of New York as well for a brief time. Robert Lovett, who is Secretary of War for Truman, I believe, and then I think comes back in the Eisenhower administration as well. And then Prescott serves in the Senate for quite a few years as well. So a lot of these guys become senior statesmen in the early Cold War period. Brown Brothers Harriman, of course, is famous for being a sort of back channel for Nazi Germany to ferret some of their money out when the war starts to look more dire. They very clearly, and this is very documented, help German industrialists hide their money before the invasion of before the opening of the Western Front, should I say, or the Third Front, should I say, before D-Day. But on top of that, and this is one that I've had trouble substantiating, because I've read a whole book about this and they don't mention Prescott once, but it's mentioned a lot online and in some articles. I just haven't been able to track it down, but Prescott Bush is often linked to the business plot.
I was just going to say that, yeah. But go ahead, continue.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's hard to really substantiate this, but the business plot was a now largely proven. It was a group of American financiers and business titans right before the Second World War that came together to lead a essentially fascist coup on the FDR government for various reasons, but mainly to bring the country back on the gold standard and to not go to war with Germany. So this was all done using Smedley Butler, who is one of the most decorated U.S. veterans, and also was at the time a massive anti-war voice in the United States. They were going to
widely revered. Everyone loved him. Widely revered.
Hero, in many ways, kind of the like one of the most significant figures in the anti-war movement. He was going to be used as their figurehead to kind of march on Washington and throw FDR out. They say that Prescott Bush was a part of this cabal. I haven't been able to find any like proof of this, any smoking gun proof, but it's said in many sources. Another one with
and just to clarify too, Smedley Butler, when asked, because he had to testify in front of Congress, I'm pretty sure there was like some proceeding where he had to testify. When asked to present the names, he didn't present the names. Presumably to retain some kind of leverage, or maybe there's like a lot of people don't necessarily remember this or think about this because it's not the way we do news now, but there was like a unspoken agreement in the news definitely amongst that echelon of people where you weren't gonna muckrake. You weren't gonna throw mud on someone's name.
Yeah.
Even if you knew they were kind of guilty. Another good example would be the reason that the press back in those days didn't widely report on all the affairs that these politicians and business people were having was because there was a gentleman's agreement. That's the word I'm looking for. There was a gentleman's agreement to not lambaste anybody without having some kind of verifiable proof, which is not the world that we live in today.
Right.
But that's why his name, Smedley Butler, never said Prescott Bush's name, but he never said anyone's name.
Yeah.
So we don't even know who personally came to him to proposition him with this, but he took it to Congress and was like, look, this is what's happening. We got to stop it. So go ahead, continue.
Yeah, I do wonder on that note, it's interesting you bring that up. I wonder if Prescott Bush's name is associated through tabloids of the time, maybe? Is this like a long-standing rumor that he was one of the names? Again, I'm not sure where that association comes from.
I think it's because, so the reason that he gets looped into this, and I would have to verify date and publication here, but I'm pretty sure Brown Brothers Harriman got in trouble for having Nazi money. There was a bank.
Yeah.
There was somebody that was associated. He was widely associated with that bank, and like had ties to industrialists in Germany, direct ties to people of that echelon in Germany. And when America said we were going into the war, basically they're like, all right, anybody who's doing business in Germany, stop it.
Yeah.
Ford, stop sending them engines, please, because we're at war with them now. Oil companies, stop sending them oil because we're at war with them now. And the bank or a bank or some financial institution that he was overtly associated with, like a key player at, got in trouble for having Nazi money. I'm pretty sure that's how at least his name gets looped into that, is because he can be, by one degree of separation, associated with a motive for why he would want to do that, or why he would be involved with a group of people who would want to do that. So
yeah, that makes sense.
Kind of a thread there.
That makes sense. And also, there's also the Ohio connection as well. Like a lot of the sort of what you would call fifth columnist activity in the lead up to the Second World War was happening in the Midwest, which was kind of this, there's a big concentration of German Americans in the Midwest that had, we'll say, sympathies for the government in Germany. And that's where, the German American Bund comes out of there, for example. Mm-hmm. The American Nazi Party had a strong presence there. And, for example,
Still do.
Oh, yeah. No, that has not changed. Yeah.
Not to glaze over that.
But one last thing as well is that the Japanese also were doing a lot of fifth columnist activities in Chicago and in Detroit at this time. Have you ever heard of this stuff before?
No, the Bund and the Nazi. I've done a couple videos specifically on the Bund and pockets of very, like, not people who were pro-Germany, people who were Nazis. They were training to be like Nazis.
Yep.
In Long Island was a stronghold. There was at the base of Brookhaven National Labs, which used to be this place called Camp Upton, is this town that was basically a Bund city. They hit Fuhrer Road, Hitler Street.
Oh my God.
They openly practiced racially discriminatory housing practices until 2017, when the government told them to stop. But it was a camp, and it was called, I can't believe. I'll remember here in a second. But there were these camps all over. Just researching the Long Island one, I found like 4 or 5 others, and that web stretched well out into Minnesota. There was in the Midwest is huge. I used to live in Nebraska, and when I lived in Nebraska, the largest distributor in America of pro-Nazi propaganda lived in my city.
Really?
And he still is there. He still operates. I don't know if he's the largest, but that never went away. And that is a direct holdout from the same types of pro-Nazi communities that were existing in and amongst American cities. They really rose to popularity in the 30s, and many of them had to take down their iconography when the Americans entered the war. But they didn't stop thinking that the Nazis were right, I guess is the easiest way to say that. They didn't change their ideology. They just took down the swastikas.
Well, dude, I'm glad you're plugged into this, because I'm going to be doing a series on this specific topic later this year.
Yes, dude.
No, it's going to be called American Gladio, and it starts with these networks and then translates into the Cold War, kind of the Birchers, the Minutemen, and all of these kind of this tapestry of militias that all come out of this, right? But have you heard of the Japanese activities in the Midwest?
No, that I hadn't. But quick side note, though, there's an author, his name is Chris Verga. He has documented the history of sadistic happening in Long Island, but he's written a number of books specifically about the Nazi spy presence, the Nazi camps, and the Nazi sympathizing populations that existed in Long Island. And I don't know if you know this about Long Island, but Long Island is called the arsenal of democracy. And
really?
Just look into the companies that existed in Long Island. And even Brookhaven, Camp Upton was right next to this Nazi camp, right?
Camp Upton.
They closed Camp Upton and built Brookhaven National Labs, and Brookhaven National Labs was built to be the premier nuclear research facility post-World War II. And
well, I guess
right
with all the all the Nazis coming over with a paperclip, right?
That's the thread, and that's I've done a bunch of videos about it, and that's my opinion. The military industry, MICs, are the largest employing companies on Long Island. Military industrial contractors, big names, Grumman, Lockheed, any company that you think is making big time for war. They probably started in Long Island. In fact, aviation kind of really starts in general in Long Island. But they make the subs also, like in Boston, Massachusetts, somewhere. It's right across the water. But you have to analyze there's so much. You're gonna love it. Like there's so much wild bonkers about Nazis, espionage throughout World War II, Cold War, and even up to today. That's like. They call it the arsenal of democracy. So, but back to your point, I'm getting on the tangent about stuff that I've spazzed about.
No, that's really good stuff. I'm going to look into this for real.
You're going to love it. Like it's endless. That's what I mean to say is like looking into any of these topics. The Long Island is one where you just keep reading and you spiral out in more connections and you just keep reading and it doesn't get any lighter. The heaviest military research, the heaviest nuclear research, the biggest names, the most powerful people, Long Island, and Chris Verga is the author. He's kind of documented a lot of the Nazi stuff there. But I had no idea about the Japanese groups in Chicago and Detroit, but I'm assuming they were probably exploiting industrial centers. Yeah, Detroit was probably still big at that point, you know.
This is interesting here. Well, okay, so first of all, I am actually working on a History of Modern Japan series right now. I'm just wrapping it up. It's on my Patreon right now, the first 7 chapters of it. This is like a massive undertaking that I've kind of done. Just, again, okay, so I guess to return to your earlier point, you know, does this stuff ever get too heavy or does it ever, you know, get me angry? This Japan series is kind of a cool off for me, you know? Like I'm giving myself some time to do some like actual some what you would call quote unquote serious history, you know, just telling the story of modern Japan from the fall of the samurai to Pearl Harbor. And this is going to lead into my post-war stuff as well, because I'm going to be documenting the kind of occupation period and all that, and that gets back into CIA and whatnot. Okay, anyways, in this research, I found this interesting thread. So in the 1930s, Japanese intelligence was always interesting because they employed a lot of like secret patriotic societies to do their overseas work. They called themselves the patriotic societies, but also the members would sometimes call themselves continental ronin. So the idea was that a ronin is a masterless samurai. So they would go to the continent as kind of unofficial Japanese intel agents and go perform intelligence duties off the books for the Japanese military. So in the lead up to World War II, when relations between the U.S. and Japan were terrible, many continental ronin made their way to North America, and one agent in particular, whose name is Naka Nakane, ends up in Detroit. First, he's in Canada. He actually goes through Canada and spends some time there, but he ends up in Detroit, and he links up with the Black Israelites of the Nation of Islam.
Interesting.
And he starts channeling funds to them to create an anti-war movement among African Americans in Detroit and Chicago. And very interestingly, he creates this whole he starts to popularize this thread that ties Japanese victory in a war with African victory against colonialism, and creates this kind of thread, this ideological thread, that African Americans, radical African Americans, should support the Japanese war effort because it is against the same opponent, the white imperialists, the white colonizer, whatever you want to call it. He kind of marries these two worlds together and creates the kind of confluence of interest that you would find totally contradictory otherwise, but he's able to do it, and he mobilizes people, he starts groups there, and this is all at the same time that the Japanese are also working in Ethiopia as well during the Italian invasion as well. So like they're working on all fronts here, and they have this like real trying to link the African like decolonial movement to their own kind of imperial quest in Asia to try to excise Western imperialists from the continent. Truly fascinating stuff.
Dude, it's just, it's that alone is making me think so many things that just hurt my brain right now. But there's just so, I guess I love it and I hate it. I love that there's so much of this untold history, but then I hate it because it's like, what else is not told?
Yeah.
What documents got burned? Like, we might see something that gets declassified because somebody forgot to shred it, but like, what documents got burned? Which again was a standard practice, at least for American intelligence, for a long time. Definitely for certain echelons of information. But yeah, I mean, kind of this again is why I see what you do is important. Not only do you uncover these new avenues for exploration, but you're willing to take the time to give the context. And I understand that we live in like a short attention span world now. Like it's hard for people to concentrate for more than 30 seconds on something. But I have never been that way. I've always been a long form person. And I don't know. This is what gives me hope. That there are people out here who are really trying to shine, not just like pull out the highlights and be like, look at this crazy shit I read on Reddit, but like really explore this stuff at a granular level. It's just so crazy. Like that, what you're describing, that ties into why COINTELPRO exists.
Yep.
Right? That explains, it gives more clarity and justification and context. And then understanding that COINTEL and why COINTEL was created and what the purposes were, it makes a lot of the stuff that we see now, especially around specific lines in society that division is sown. Again, would the archetypes of this behavior in the 60s, would they look at this world and be pleased with themselves, or would they look at this world and be horrified? The same question could be asked for Eisenhower on his military industrial complex exit speech. He contributed to that.
Oh yeah,
right. It was just at the end where he's like, maybe I got played. And I can't help but think there's an element to that with these so many figures who think they're doing this good thing, or maybe even had some kind of like altruistic purpose behind why they did it, or justification as to why they did it. But then, like, if they could see the world that exists now because of that, have you ever gone into the In-Q-Tel rabbit hole?
A little bit. Like, I mean, I know they were instrumental to, starting Peter Thiel's whole Palantir thing.
Google Earth.
They
used to be heavily invested in video games.
And then doesn't Oracle come out of that as well in a way? Or Oracle was CIA at the beginning, right?
Even Google, like there are now undeniable threads tying Sergey Brin, I think Sergey and whoever the other guy was that created Google.
Yeah.
To that they were being funded by DARPA.
Yeah.
It was being developed as a military grade intelligence apparatus, and it just got sold to us. Like even the idea of targeted ads, that the CIA was the original group of people who developed that code through In-Q-Tel, and it was for data mining. It was for intelligence purposes. Every time you get sold an ad, that is CIA grade code that is selling you that ad. That's why they're so effective at it.
Huh.
And again, so what I'm saying is, do you think these guys would look at it and grin and like be completely pleased? This is the omnipresence they were hoping for, omni-influence they were hoping for? Or would they look at it and be like, I have now contributed in creating a system from which no human can have? I don't know. There's so many like different ways to unpack this information. And again, like a lot of your stuff, you've maybe referenced stuff that happens down the line, but you haven't even got to the 80s.
No.
You haven't even got to like the real weird stuff with the Iraq war, you know?
Yeah.
So like, I guess what I mean to say is like on your radar, where are the other hot spots? Even from the stuff, the body of work that you've created up until this point, what do you think is like the culmination? Or like, what do you is there a culmination, or is it just like a steady slope up?
Like, what do you mean? Like, is there an end goal to all this?
Not necessarily end goal, but like, what do you think is the moment in that time period that best encapsulates the insanity of all of it? Yeah, I mean, maybe during that time frame, maybe it's JFK, but I can't help but think that in more ways it's probably Vietnam. Less like JFK that had a crazy world impact, but I want to say the stuff leading up to and occurring in Vietnam in a global sense had like a bigger impact. I don't know if that question is I don't know if I clarified that at all, but
I mean, it's like you could almost like look at the 1947 National Security Act as being like kind of the moment of no return, right? I mean, that's Truman, right? And you know, you could almost blame Truman more than you could blame Eisenhower for this whole mess that we're in now, right? Is that, you know, Truman creates the CIA under the monumental 1947 National Security Act. It creates the Air Force, which you know, seems reasonable, but the Air Force is in many ways the driver of the military industrial complex. I mean, if you look at the aerospace industry in general, that's where a large majority of that defense spending was going during the Cold War, was aerospace. And I'm using a broad umbrella here saying, you know, rocketry, planes, jet fighters, et cetera, right? So yeah, you have those two, and then it also creates the National Security Council as well. So it's like it creates just the architecture of the national security state as we know it today. So that could be one, right? That could be one. I mean, Vietnam is obviously very significant as well. The JFK assassination, you know, maybe. I mean, that this is a moment where a lot of Americans, I think it awoke a lot of Americans to the darker side of society and the sort of the subterfuge, because this is something I keep hammering home in a lot of discussions like this, is that before 1963, but really before 1975, Americans on the whole trusted their government and didn't think that the CIA was doing anything that bad, right? Because there just wasn't that much information out, and there wasn't really like all the coup in Iran, for example, was seen at the time as a wholly organic thing.
Legitimate completely. Yeah.
Yes. Right. We only really learn about that when the family jewels get released in 1975 after Watergate. Right. So Americans by and large trusted that these institutions worked until the mid-70s. So you could see Watergate as being a excuse the pun, watershed moment in that sense. Right. Iran-Contra is kind of you could see it as a culmination as well. I mean, this is really where those like narco-trafficking networks, arms trafficking networks, and private intel kind of take over the whole paradigm, right? The CIA gets under Carter. Carter does a huge cleanup of the CIA in 1977, I believe, and puts Stansfield Turner as the CIA director, who was a Navy man with not really much intelligence experience, and he sends him into the den of wolves and says, get rid of all the problematic elements. This is where James Jesus Angleton gets kicked out. This is where George H.W. Bush gets kicked out, and this is where Ted Shockley gets kicked out. Right? These are three of the extremely problematic elements in the CIA.
Egregious offenders, yeah. Sure.
Yes. But the problem is, right, you send these guys out on the street, it's not like they're going to stop doing this stuff, right? They just set up private networks and they wait until a Republican comes into power and then they're right back in it under Reagan, right? It was only a little bump. And that's what really leads to the privatization of these networks, right? Carter's kicking out of these elements from the CIA just makes them more careful. It just pushes them to put more plausible deniability, create more private shell companies instead of having things written on CIA typeface, right? So you could see that as well, right? The Iran-Contra being a significant moment, because that leads then directly into 9/11 through, the sort of shadow banking complex that continues all the way into that, right? So there's a lot of places where you can kind of see these culmination moments, and what I call, a look behind the curtain as well, right? Where for a brief moment, the curtain's open, where we can see what the machinations behind, and then everything gets closed again, right? Those happen a few times, what you'd call structural deep events, right?
Yeah, man, it's just so wild to think that with all of the knowledge, at various points in time when people were analyzing any of the events that you just mentioned, it was a conspiracy. And maybe 20, 30, 40 years later, enough comes out to where it's like, oh, okay, well, that's clearly it was a conspiracy, but it was conspiratorial elements. It was rogue elements within the call is coming from inside the house. Okay. Yep. It's not some outside actors or Russian involvement or something like that. And again, not to minimize that, because America, we are under threat for sure, but there's a lot of stoking of flames that we do for our own purposes to ourselves. And at one point, even having that idea was considered to be, lambasted to be a conspiracy theorist. In fact, I talked about this with James DiEugenio. The word conspiracy theory emerges out of JFK.
Yes.
That's that was a pejorative term that they literally created to make sure that anyone who was talking about anything other than the official story was made to be a nut. And maybe that should give you an idea of what it has turned into now. But yeah, I would be inclined to agree with you as well, as like there was a certain point where most Americans trusted the government. JFK was certainly a turning point. Iran-Contra was certainly a highlight, but I don't know if people fully ingested the severity. And then certainly once we get to 9/11, maybe that's the reason for the suppression of the Iran-Contra stuff, is because it makes all of 9/11 an event that doesn't make much sense. It makes a lot of it make a lot more sense when you realize a lot of the same players, and in fact, even the network of Al-Qaeda, which they don't really talk about even in official channels, the CIA created that. We created them to fight the Russians in the 80s as a part of the Iran-Contra affair.
Yes.
So like that's these seemingly unrelated things are all tied together. And this might be a good time just to spend a little bit talking about it here at the end about the Epstein stuff. Now we've freely mentioned it throughout the episode, and I think that's good because it kind of just reiterates the point that this isn't separated. It's much more connected than you might first think. Of course, when people think about the Epstein stuff, they immediately go to the which is terrible and horrific. But your perspective on that, you're like, enough people are already dealing with that. Let me actually unpack the more business and science web of connection and happenings, which again, so glad to see, because everyone is covering all the stuff, and very few people have even remotely good takes on it. I'm interested in like what is your mindset? What was your mindset before you started to really look into it, and how has it evolved since you've been looking into it more and more?
Yeah, so I'm writing an article right now about Epstein and his connections to the sort of to big science. And this idea really spawned out of watching the 2 hours of the Epstein-Bannon interview that we have access to. I assume you've watched it. Yeah,
super unhinged. If you haven't seen it, you should watch it.
It's maybe the most fascinating primary document to come out of all this, in my opinion.
Yeah.
In my opinion,
Sure.
I find it like, and people have commented on it and have said, Epstein's a midwit. They don't really say much of anything here. They're just kind of dunking on us. I actually think they say a lot, but that's just me. Okay, I think they say a lot, and if you listen to it and really try to understand what they're saying, I think they do explain a lot, specifically about the philosophy or the ideology of these people, right? Of these what you could call the pinnacle of the elite, right? Like, what do they actually believe? Like, what are they actually trying to do here? Because endlessly accumulating money is one thing. But there has to be something that's driving these people beyond that, right? I mean, to me, that only makes sense. Maybe there isn't, but anyways. So throughout the interview, Bannon keeps kind of prodding Epstein about the Santa Fe Institute. He keeps trying to get him to talk about it, and Epstein remains kind of cagey about it. He kind of diverts into topics about science, but he doesn't really want to address the actual topic. And the Santa Fe Institute is this it's like a private research, I'll call it like think tank, but it's more like a campus for professors to come together and to study in Santa Fe, New Mexico, to study what they call, amongst other things, applied complexity. Okay, so there's two ways to go about it, and I'm kind of going to do this in my interview, in my article. Is that, like, one, is this all just that was just like they're just trying to cover for whatever kind of sick
money laundering,
or blackmail, or another key element is using these professors to get scholarships for victims. Okay, that's a key piece there.
Interesting.
That's a key piece, and it's important to remember, because I think this is one of the main reasons why he was so close to all these institutions. And God, okay, allegedly. Okay, I'm going through the emails. Okay. So there's one email from Epstein to another scientist friend that's part of the Santa Fe Institute, and they're talking about this girl Alexa, and how he can plan dinners for Alexa with all these different scientists at the Santa Fe Institute. These top, we're talking theoretical physicists, we're talking microbiologists, we're talking geneticists. Like, these are like great minds of their fields, okay? And he's talking about how he can organize these dinners with this girl Alexa, with all these top scientists. This is allegedly, okay? Alexa, there is an Alexa within the Epstein files that is today actually a theoretical physicist. Her name is Alexa Staley, Jess Staley's daughter. Jess Staley being the Barclays banker, JP Morgan Chase executive, who is one of the most mentioned names in the Epstein emails. Was Jess Staley giving his daughter to Epstein to get her a full ride or a scholarship or admission at a top school? Anyways.
See, okay, again, like, that would be crazy, but knowing even what we do now know, it's not so crazy. Like, that, the motive is there, the access is there, and I don't know what beyond all of Jeffrey Epstein's correspondences we're gonna get, but like, I don't know.
She's today a theoretical physicist. Like, the Epstein program, if this is allegedly real, it worked. It worked. And there's multiple instances of this in the emails where there's it'll be young undergrad female students who are being, brought into these networks to, get through you spend some time with Epstein and his friends, and then you end up getting admitted to whatever school, allegedly.
It really makes me think of another example, but purely for Hollywood. For people that don't understand that or think that wouldn't be the case, there are many instances of organizations like this emerging, offering a claim to a specific demographic, and it turns out that all they were doing was abusing that specific demographic.
Yep.
There was a great documentary that came out right around the time of Harvey Weinstein. Can't remember the name of that either, but it's a great documentary, and basically it talks about there was this production studio in LA that opened, and it was like, young men actors come live at this house, and you'll mingle with other actors and directors, and you'll start your career. But all it was a way for like Brett Ratner, all the Weinstein era guys that got in trouble, directors, they were a part of this thing, and it was literally a prostitution house. They would sucker these probies from elsewhere in the country, young, fresh skin, and promise them this or that. And some of them did like get legitimate acting jobs, but it was like they had to pass through the Hollywood version of what you're talking about, which is like
very similar. Sounds eerily similar.
Version. Yeah. And I guess what I mean, the only reason I'm saying that, not connecting that to the Epstein stuff, but it's like this stuff goes on in every industry.
Yep.
And this is kind of a larger part. I've been saying this since well before people tolerated me talking about Epstein. He is a node. He is not the one. He's not the top. He is not the singular. He is a node in a very complex network of this that exists for a specific class of people and has for a very long time.
Oh, you're just serving the ball right back to me here to get back to complexity. Okay. So Santa Fe Institute, right? Allegedly they study the applied complexity. And what this essentially means is that they're trying to predict how complex systems work and trying to predict outcomes within complex systems. And complex systems are best illustrated, and they talk about this a lot in the Bannon Epstein interview, not in these terms, like they don't never call it applied complexity, but it is the same thing they're describing. They are black boxes. An input goes in, something happens in the black box, and an output comes out. But from point A to point B, inside that black box, we, and even the operator, has very little to no idea what is happening. Let me give you some examples. The main example they describe is markets, the financial system. That an input goes in, let's say somebody buys a stock at a certain price. This is, again, really simplifying and dumbing down the concept. And then the price goes up or the price goes down. The price does something, they sell. Between those 2 points, we have very little idea of what actually drove that specific element to either go up or go down, right? There's an input, there's an output. But in between, what actually caused the stock to fluctuate in price? Millions of factors that we can't actually hammer down.
Yeah.
Same thing, you could look at it in the same way with human consciousness, right? We have very little idea of how a thought gets developed, right? We understand that we have thoughts, but how did that thought come into being? We can't really explain it. Yeah. And then the one that's most compelling is artificial intelligence, LLMs. You put in a prompt, the AI comes out with an answer. We have no idea actually how it took the data that we fed it and turned it into an output. Still to this day, AI engineers claim that they have no idea how an AI system comes to a certain conclusion. It's building it off the data we fed into it. But how did it actually build off of that data? We don't know. So, this is where I extrapolate. Epstein himself, in a meta sense, was creating a complex network with himself as the control element. He in a meta sense, he is the black box. He is he meets somebody on one side of the network and connects them to another one. We don't really understand what happened in between, but those links are made. I mean, I'm mapping it out now, and it's extremely dense and complex. Did Epstein view himself as living complexity, or as trying to create that complexity and then try to understand or try to shape it to his desired outcome, right? And was that why the Santa Fe Institute was so fascinated in Epstein and why he contributed so much money to them? Because he might have himself been almost an experiment case himself. That's just a thought that I've been having, because it also brings up the idea of cybernetics. I don't know if you've ever looked into that at all.
For sure, yeah. I think it's important that we kind of explore, if we're talking about Epstein and science, like the transhumanist stuff is absolutely worth speaking about a bit. Yeah, that cybernetics, I think, is used pretty liberally these days to mean, just that, right? Transhumanism, the creation of, machines that will eventually take over human capabilities, right? This sort of stuff. But at its core, cybernetics is this belief that all complex systems in our universe function on a feedback system. So that, for example, an action happens, feedback comes back to the system, and the system adapts based on its own feedback to correct course. The term cybernetics actually it comes from the Greek word of steerer, steering a ship. So when you're setting a course for a ship, it is actually it's described. I mean, I'm not really much of a naval guy or a nautical guy, so I can't really explain it that well. But that the ship will almost steer itself if you keep on course based on its own feedback that it's getting from the waves that it's breaking. So this is where the term cybernetics comes from, is that it's that essentially all complex systems are built on the feedback that very system is giving to itself. This is also used in, for example, the body, like our kinetic system. When we pick up an item, we know we've picked it up because our brain is getting feedback that there is like a stronger surface or a connection there. If we didn't have that system, we wouldn't know if we're actually picking it up, for example, or if we're actually touching something solid, right? So this type of feedback loop, which sounds very, very basic the way I'm explaining it, is reproduced everywhere. Epstein, in a sense, was providing the feedback to his network. He was the one that was, if we're believing that he was blackmailing potentially, if we believe that he held large stores of blackmail, if we believe that he was linking people together, which he clearly was, he was maybe the most successful power broker in human history, right? Then he is, in that sense, the core driver of this cybernetic system. I think just these observations about the meta quality of Epstein as himself a kind of controlling agent within a complex network, and then his fascination, because I do truly believe that if there was one thing that was really driving him was his fascination with science and math. 100%. Yeah. 100%.
So in his fascination in these systems, was it him trying to explain his own reality, or was it him trying to bring his own observations of how human networks, sociological networks, translate into complexity theory as well, right? I think that these are questions that are worth asking.
Well, it certainly, yes, that's what humans do. Humans create things that are, in like esoteric circles, there's this idea that most technology is stuff that we've created to mimic a supernatural thing that we know about, right? Like a simple example would be FaceTime. That's omnipresence. Now anyone can be anywhere in the world. We're just mimicking some kind of spiritual or divine idea. But in a more human, literal sense, humans do that all the time. They mirror, and I mean, especially with technology and our generation of technological abundance, the way technology is used and really was starting to be used as we were growing up. We're just kind of mimicking other systems with technology to increase efficiency in some way. I guess the point of what I'm saying here is that looking at him as some kind of, I see it completely that a person who is obsessed with those things would themselves revel in the fact that they created one.
Right.
And much less were operating at the top of it. That to me does not seem so far out there. I think many humans do that on much smaller levels and certainly less sinister levels in so many things with how they live their life. But with somebody with an ego like Epstein, that there's like I could easily see him deriving some kind of sick pleasure, knowing or reveling in the fact that he is in some way taking this thing that he does and encoding it in a supposedly legitimate circumstance or situation. Again, the act of creation, taking something out of your mind and bringing it to existence by drawing or building it. I can clearly see that. It honestly makes me feel like, and this isn't necessarily related to Epstein, but it is related to technology and relevant. I bring up this documentary all the time, and it's a documentary that was made in the early 2000s. We Live in Public, and it's about this guy who was a pioneer of the internet and like .com boom pioneer. He ended up launching the first internet radio show, the first streaming internet video program. His name was Josh Harris, I think.
Josh Harris.
Anyways,
yeah, okay. This name sounds familiar. Yeah.
If you haven't seen that doc, dude, you have to see it. It's so unhinged. But basically, he did just that in the 80s.
Wait, Josh Harris. It's not the investment banker Josh Harris, is it?
No.
It's a different Josh Harris, right? Because I've got Josh Harris here, who was one of the co-founders of Apollo Global Capital. It can't be the same guy.
No. This guy's name Josh Harris, and he is a .com millionaire who founded pseudo.com. But I don't think, and Josh Harris is like the most generic name other than John Smith. I don't know if it could get more.
No, sorry for derailing you there. Sorry.
No.
I just knew the name rung a bell.
I was like, dude, if we're tying this together, that's going to make my day. But that documentary is pretty fascinating because this guy who was a pioneer of the internet, who literally saw the infrastructure that we exist on now, he saw it before it was being built and as it was being built, and played a role in it. But he basically makes his millions in the .com bubble, the .com boom. At the end of the bubble, he had already sold his company, or he has to sell his company, and he has all this money, so he conducts this experiment, this social experiment. He bought a building in Soho in New York, and he let 100 people live there, and it was going to be for a year. And he gave them drugs, he gave them food, he gave them a place to sleep. They could do all sorts of crazy activities, including be interrogated by a CIA therapist in the basement.
Okay, well, probably was some sort of MK Ultra offshoot then, right, or something like that.
It very well could be, and it didn't go for a year. It only lasted like I think 100 days because people lost their mind. The caveat was, though, he was going to film everything, and he owned the video.
Oh.
And you see, this documentary documents all of the video that was being videoed of this thing as it was happening. And you see exactly what you're talking about. You see a guy who has designed the infrastructure for the internet and is literally generating the idea of people living in public, which is the reality that we now occupy, inescapable reality that we now occupy. So and then he also, this is after that the house crashes down. He's like, okay, so now I'm going to marry this woman and we're going to televise our whole life. It was like before reality TV, like way ahead of its time. But because they're televising their life, it drives their life into the dirt because they're more concerned about other people's perception of what their life is than about what their life actually is, which is the same existential crisis that humanity is having right now for the same reasons.
Right.
The only reason I'm bringing this up is because there are plenty of examples of tech bros and billionaires innovative people who have an idea in their mind, and they, by way of their actions, it's not even metaphorical in some ways. It's like quite literal. They're literally engaging this thing, this idea. They're bringing it into some form of reality. And, you know, what you're describing about Epstein, could he have done it? Would there have been a motive to get victims embedded into institutions, high-level institutions, become the thought leaders and influence the future of those relative fields? Would he want to do that? Yes, that's clear. There's no debate about that. That's one of the things he was doing, not just with them, but with entire other groups of people. An even more complex system, if that makes sense. I think you're dead on. That is the angle that obviously the sensationalism of the is always going to it's going to scare people more, so we're going to talk about them more. And we should be talking about it. Yes. I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about it, because it is important to analyze what kind of level of depravity these people were behaving in. But what I think the reason is why at least the mainstream news, the main stories, the what would be respected names in talking about these topics, they're avoiding this whole portion of it, because I'm sure it gets very scary very fast.
Well, it gets into like eugenics and all this stuff. You know, these are all
very fast.
We're really close to those circles. I mean, famously, right, the Santa Fe Institute is only 50 minutes away from Jeffrey Epstein's ranch in New Mexico, the Zorro Ranch. Which like there's tons of I mean, I think that these theories are unfounded, but I think they're compelling that he had an underground facility at the Zorro Ranch. There's been a lot of photo analysis that have shown that there's strange vents on the side of the building that seem to hint at an underground facility that needs to vent up, these big industrial grates. So it's interesting to maybe consider, was Jeffrey Epstein bringing these scientists, he was clearly bringing them back to his ranch. There's tons of email evidence of this, but bringing them back to do their own experiments on his ranch, that's potentially nightmarish, right?
Yeah. Because the only reason they would be doing that is because it was for sure illegal. Yeah. But whatever it was for sure no one could find out about it. So we have to do it in my secret bunker. Yeah.
And I find it interesting what you brought up with the sort of the guy doing the video experiments. It makes me think of the Panopticon in a way, where he had cameras on his guests at all time, and he got inspired by this through his early interest in internet and networks, right? So you're touching on another element of cybernetics here, where it's that all fields of applied science are actually, they share universal truths. And this makes me think of Auguste Kekulé. Kekulé is his name. I don't know if you've heard of this guy, the Kekulé ring. He discovered the benzene ring in the 1800s because he dreamt it in a dream. He dreamt he was researching the benzene ring, which is this chemistry problem. How is benzene actually arranged? Again, I'm not a chemist, so I can't really explain this that well. But he had a dream of the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail, which he took as inspiration for how the benzene structure is actually. There we go, right there. So you see, now we're getting more into the occult side here of this cybernetics research. But here, this again goes down to: are there universal truths to the universe? Is the universe built on a specific code where we can translate what would seem completely unrelated topics through these universal truths, such as Kekulé's dream of the Ouroboros turning into his discovery of the benzene ring, for example, right? Another one is I'm reading this book about cybernetics right now by who's considered the father of cybernetics. His name is Dr. Viner. He says that his research at the end of World War II, interestingly enough, in U.S. government labs, mostly at Los Alamos, that his research in early computing led to breakthroughs in neurology and also in breakthroughs in wireless communication. So that these networks that he was discovering in early binary computer networks were then applied to these other fields in the same lab to come to, again, universal truths. And this is essentially cybernetics. It's this ability to link all scientific practices together through these kind of shared characteristics. It's advanced stuff, but it's really interesting.
Well, I'm glad you're on it. I'm glad that you are going to pick it apart, because it's like people deliberately ignore that almost. It's kind of, they just want to stick on like the big bullet point. And again, like what I have to explain, I've had to have to explain this to my parents too. Jeffrey Epstein is a node. He is a node. And like, whether he was working on his own and off his own ambition, or whether there was somebody helping propel or steer him, I don't know. I don't necessarily have opinions one way or the other, but this, like what we're seeing about him, it's well beyond just running a prostitution ring to powerful people, and even like that's running a prostitution ring, running a blackmail ring. That's not even that exciting. Like we've been doing that. People have been doing that for forever. As long as video and pictures have existed, we've been doing it.
For sure.
Like why that surprises people that people do that, it always annoys me. It's like, well, that's an old trick. It's it's like the deeper layers, the deeper layers that get into the real weird stuff, that honestly could not have happened any other time than the modern time that we're living in. I just think it's funny that there's so many different convergences right now. Like humanity as a whole is having this transhumanist debate. Like, do we merge ourselves with technology? What can we digitize consciousness? You know, like we're having these crazy conversations that only sci-fi writers thought about before us. But then we're also getting into these strange territories where things like Epstein are coming up, not necessarily just Epstein, but the idea of the ruling class in some way being this corrupt and amoral, like exploiting us in the pure corrupt, amoral sense of exploitation. There's like so many different aspects of humanity that we're having to like question, and we're not even like, we won't even bring in the whole alien debate, but it's like that's another serious question that people are asking. Are we alone in the universe? It's not it's people have been asking it for forever, but en masse right now, all these different things are converging where we don't necessarily know what our place is, or what it will be in the future. And there are people like Jeffrey Epstein who are trying to create a very specific view of the future. And it's crazy. It's kind of the same thing with In-Q-Tel. Me and my buddy went down that rabbit hole pretty deep, and it's another similar situation where it's like people might think this isn't real, or this doesn't mean anything. They certainly didn't then, but when you look at the surveillance infrastructure that exists in our everyday life now, it was a 30-year plan. It took 30 years for the technology and to sell it to people and to have people just use it as ubiquitously as it is used now. It's a long play. It's not something that can be analyzed by just looking at Sergey Brin. It's not something that can be analyzed just by looking at a specific character like Jeffrey Epstein. You have to zoom out and you have to look at the context and complete and total scope of what is going on here. And again, if I haven't said it enough, I'm going to continue saying it. Your page is the epicenter of that for me. And I'm so happy that you're looking at the Epstein because you are going to find, you're going to spot patterns that other people, they'll never be able to spot because they're not looking at a large enough set of data around it. And everything that we create is like the precursor for the next great thing, right? It's like, yeah, we did that, but here's how we can make it better, and we just get better and better and better. the only way this gets better for you is if HBO pays you to do this shit on HBO.
Yeah, I'll have less freedom though. I'll have less freedom. I love being independent. I love being independent because I don't have to give my show notes to anybody. I don't have to have my scripts looked after. I make what I want to make, and I am lucky enough to have a solid Patreon foundation, a foundation of support there that is able to support me, and they believe in my vision. So they've been very again, they're my producers. They tell me what they want and what they don't want and what they like and what they don't like it, but I make, and I think that's a really great way to do it, to crowdsource it, and I can still make what I want to make, and then also know that there's average people that are interested in what I do, and I want to give them what they want as well. So I think it's a really good setup that way. With HBO, I'd be making probably what they want more than what I want.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, for sure, without a doubt. And to your point, yeah, that the idea of even the Patreon or having paid producers crowdsourcing it, you get to not only make what you want, but then you also get a direct line into what the people want. Yes. And that you like that I did that video. Okay, well, I'll do a couple more. You want me to do a couple more? Sure. Whereas in the current media landscape now, typically the producer is the most out of touch with what the people want. So, yes. I just, I hope for continued success in your endeavors here, that you can continue to completely support yourself doing this as your full-time thing. This is what you need to be doing full-time for sure.
Thanks, bro.
I don't know if there's any desk job that this is going to be acceptable or that you would be being utilized to your fullest, complete ability. And I guess, one last question here before we wrap it up is maybe you answered it previously, just when we were just talking, but what is the ideal scenario? Does this have an end? You've picked an exploration of topics that don't have an end. You can do this forever, yes. But do you want to do this forever? And if you do, how do you see growing and evolving this thing into, again, being better than what came before it?
I do want to keep doing this forever, for sure. This is my passion. I mean, I feel extremely blessed, extremely lucky to be able to be a YouTuber full time. It's the kind of thing that at 18 years old, I was this. If I saw myself today at 27, I'd be like, this is exactly where I want to be. So that, in that sense, I'm extremely satisfied. But there are things that I want to explore. For example, this Japan series that'll be coming out later this year on YouTube, actually very shortly. As soon as the last episode is done on Patreon, which I hope to be done with this by March. I hope, so I can move on to other but I hope to be done in March. Then the first one's going to come out on YouTube. And this is just kind of me experimenting because I have other interests outside of this CIA stuff. I know a lot of people, they pick their lane and they stick to it. But I have a lot of other interests in other topics in history more broadly. So this Japan series is an experiment in that, and I'll be going back to the bread and butter. Don't worry, I will be going back to the CIA stuff, the intelligence stuff. Sorry, that's my dog in the background.
No worries.
There.
No worries.
Yeah, I'll have to let him out here shortly. That said, though, so this is an experiment. So I do hope to experiment with other types of topics, other series. This Japan series is going to be a full docu-series, 10 episodes, all about an hour, telling the whole story. So it's this is really me experimenting with serious history. Real, I'm modeling it after a Ken Burns type documentary series type thing.
Dude, love it. Absolutely.
So, in that sense, and it's going to be, the history of Japan, but also just the history of the Pacific region, the build up to World War II in the Pacific, that's almost never discussed, never discussed. We focus so much on Europe, in the West especially, and then we never talk about what the actual foundation to Pearl Harbor, how we got there. It's just World War II in the Pacific started at Pearl Harbor. There was nothing before, right? That's the story we're told, and it's that's important context, I think. And personally, if I can just say this, I think that the Pacific is everything. I think the Pacific is everything. I think that there's a reason that we don't learn about this, because that is Like that is the foundation to the Cold War. And for example, I'll give a few examples like that I've come across, like the John Birch Society, for example, which is a massive lobby group and kind of can be seen as the origin point of the sort of the far right during the Cold War. John Birch was an OSS officer. The name of the foundation was named after this guy John Birch, who was an OSS officer who died in China in 1945 and is considered the first of the Cold War by Chinese Red Army forces. So in that sense, you have there another Pacific angle to it. Like this all comes out of the Pacific.
Direct connection, yeah.
1949, the loss of, quote unquote, loss of China. That's massively significant. That drives, so many decades of sort of policy. And I do truly believe that everything, it comes back to the Pacific much more than the Atlantic, especially after the Second World War. I think that's a big pivot that I think a lot of people miss.
I'm right there with you. I there's like a whole tangent that I went down about like nuclear stuff, and I've always felt the same way. There's no coincidence that it wasn't just because we could have been testing nukes anywhere, but we chose to do it in the Pacific Theater for a specific reason. And it's like it almost like a catty show of force. But yeah, there's I don't know, man. You got me so excited. Like, cause there's so many things you're like, oh, I need to do a video about that, or I'm working on this. I cannot wait until this stuff starts to roll out. People listening, if you're into history at all, especially if you're into the military history of the United States, you have to listen to this. You have to go see these videos and, consume this show, and support Eyes Wide Open. Keep our eyes wide open. That's what we're trying to do here. And I hope we've been able to do that here with everyone who's been listening so far. Of course, links to all your stuff will be the George W. Bush videos, Bush family videos, and your page and stuff will be in the description. But is there anything else you want to tell people before we log off here?
Yeah, content coming to YouTube soon. Again, it's going to be quite different, so I hope that people give me grace in that sense. I know that a lot of people want me to just go straight to the CIA stuff every time, but please allow me to just experiment a bit here, and I promise it's actually it'll enrich your understanding of all the other content. I promise you that. I do put a lot of emphasis on the U.S. Position in the Pacific as well, and that history. And I think that that's really important to understanding the Cold War, the interactions with Japan and China specifically. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, I'm producing right now that I'm full time. I'm producing about 3 times as much content as I was last year. So that means there's a lot of coming. Like, there's a lot of content coming. It's just going to take some time. Patreon eats first. If you want it now, it's all there. But otherwise, it will be on YouTube shortly. So, yeah, thanks for having me on, man. This was a great combo.
Dude, this was incredible. We'll definitely have you back on in some point in the next year once some of this new stuff is rolled out.
Yeah.
And of course, as we find more out about the Epstein and what you uncover as you kind of explore that from your angle. But yeah, dude, thank you so much. This is so much fun. To everyone listening, this is the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Thank you for coming along for the ride. Check out Eyes Wide Open. Links to the YouTube, Patreon, and specific videos reference will be in the description below. We'll catch y'all on the next one. See you guys.
This has been the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. The end. With your host, James Oliva. Executive producers, Clint G and James Oliva. That's obnoxious. Sound design, mix, and master by James Oliva. Literally no one cares. For more Totally Legitimate Business, subscribe to our YouTube channel at Totally Legitimate Business or add us on TikTok at TLB Pod. When will this end? Thank you for listening. Now get back to work. Move it along, buddy.